Hi, my name is Nicola Perren, and before I kick off the reading of my paper today, I wanted to explain that the PowerPoint is here to support what I'm saying as a visual aid rather than a list of highlighted key points. When I'm referring to particular thinking of individuals, I have included them as a reference. So, I am professionally recognised as an artist, maker and lecturer in textiles. This means that I'm privileged to be paid to explore and play as part of my job, but I find that this freedom to do as you wish to be rather too mythical, as unsurprisingly, when making work, it is always to fit in with a particular research directive, guided by the needs of teaching, or to accommodate your client's needs. In response to this, I have undertaken and recently completed a PhD into the communal practices of the craft-based amateur and considered how this might realign my own approach to practice. I have a particular approach to research that is recognised as artographical, which triangulates as a set of experiences in the category of arts-based research. ART, within the artographical, stands for artist, researcher, teacher, and merges knowing, doing, and making as knowledge. I have been able to use the skills of my own practice, painting, drawing, and making, to analyse and understand the approaches of the amateur. The core knowledge came from three focal points: a longitudinal case study, which was the Mouth and Quilting Bee, or MQB as I refer to them, the inspiring work over the last century of the Gee's Bend quilters, and my own practice, which has primarily been used as a tool to reflect upon and narrate my experiences of communal making. An understanding of the amateur craft maker, particularly in communal scenarios, has not been widely reported beyond an observation of learning and well-being as a benefit to the individual. While I wholeheartedly concur with these angles of understanding of the amateur, my research indicates further highlights. For this particular presentation, I've chosen to focus on communal making as an empowering act for women. So what do I mean by communal making rather than a community of makers, or quilters in this case? A community technically refers to a group of people who come together with a shared or common interest that is led by an individual or a committee. Communal making, however, refers to a group of people, again with a common interest, but there is no leadership as such. In the case of the Mouth and Quilting Bee, we created a group with a flattened rhizomatic understanding of hierarchy. The act of making quilts was a slow process, with 90% of the patchwork and quilting using hand stitch, and the quilting happening around a frame upon which we would sit shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee, stitching away, one quilt at a time. I believe this particular slow way of working communally has inadvertently created moments of autonomy and empowerment, both for the individual and, more interestingly, as a group too. Within quilt making groups, particularly in the UK, it is more usual to see quilters coming together to discuss quilting, working on in the same space, but on their own quilts. When a quilt is made by the group, more often than not, individuals will take on different aspects and rely more on a production line approach, with each member of the group being responsible for a different element of the process. For the MQB, we chose to work together on one quilt at a time, and that once my research was completed, all the working quilts would be donated to charity, in this case, a local women's shelter. So what is the MQB? Essentially, we are a small group of quilters who come together bi-weekly to sit and quilt together around a simple frame. We chatter, debate, discuss what's going on, where to get things, discuss quilting and other crafts, usually knitting, and have also visited quilting-related events together. The group was started up as a 2-month case study for my PhD, but is currently still running after 6 years. We are just waiting to be able to get back together post-COVID restrictions. Our numbers are small, and despite starting out in the village church hall, we have spent majority of the years meeting in each other's homes. Keen to keep costs down, a good Yorkshire foundation, but also to make this a more democratic group in which not having the funds to purchase potentially expensive materials and equipment would not hold people back from taking part. For the current quilt, we have a new member of the group, which has been great to add a further flavour to the conversation. As a participant observer in a longitudinal case study, I was able to be in part assimilated into the communal voice and practice of the Meltham Quilting Bee. When I started the MQB, I did so as a complete amateur with a history, or a couple of months earlier, of making a very small quilt completely incorrectly. I was keen to experience being an amateur amongst amateurs, and for some reason did not think about the implications of setting up a quilt group when I was rather clueless myself. So where did the quilters of Gee's Bend come into this? For those who have not heard of them, Gee's Bend, now known as Boykin, is a small remote hamlet and black community in Alabama, USA. Generations of black women who were brought to North America as African slaves to work in the cotton fields have been creating quilts for use in the home. The quilts themselves have a particular look to them, in contrast to the Euro-American quilts, which are presented as ordered and with a regularity in their patterns. The Gee's Bend quilts have bold, large-scale geometric patterns, are observably utilitarian, and made use of repurposed fabrics, including denim, feed sacks, headscarves, dresses, and corduroy. For these women, they had very little in terms of wealth or access to alternative means. Making was a release, but it was also a necessity in order to keep the family warm. Made by hand from old, worn clothes and household materials, the quilts could be considered as self-portraits that provide indications of their lived experiences and demonstrate the actions of the bricoleur. This inspiring body of work and narrative led me to watching a small video series of historical archives and documentaries, through which I learned that they would often piece quilts in the winter months, but in the summer they would come together in the church or on an individual's veranda to carry out the quilting together on a simple frame. This understanding of how people quilt together, for some unknown reason to me, translated as how groups quilt together now. As indicated earlier, I now understand this not to be the case, and as a result, it created a unique framework for observing communal making practices in the UK. Having made drawn notes of how I perceived the frame to work, and with a few adaptations to make it transportable in my little car or more practical to be stored in a Yorkshire terrace, I went out and built the frame for which the MQB could quilt upon. Before we go any further, it would be useful to take a step back in time. A rise in the popularity of amateur craft runs parallel with the exposure in the 1990s of global sweatshops, with an emphasis on slow production, personal expression, a drive to mend or upcycle items to avoid fast production cycles, and a switch from mass production to gift exchange. Consumers are choosing to return to the handmaking skills that became unfashionable as a particular response to women no longer wanting to be tied to the home. For women, the making of textiles has long been associated with oppression through unpaid domestic labour, and still is in mass production scenarios through low-paid labour. Yet it has also been an activity that has functioned to empower women by bringing them together and as a means to develop skills under one's own rules of engagement, as theorist Rosika Parker points out in the book The Subversive Stitch. The early 2000s saw the emergence of people coming together to make in public spaces such as cafes, parks and pubs, with movements such as Stitch and Bitch and Craftivism. people started to engage with craft making in a way that was not linked to its former associations of female oppression and unpaid labour, and pushing back against the exploitative aspects of capitalism. Quilts, quilting and quilting scholarship have long been tied to activism, ranging from abolitionist causes in the 19th century to feminist reclamation of undervalued pastime in the 20th, and incorporating economic, pacifist, environmental, labour and numerous other issues. Activist quilts are found across the globe, and their making crosses lines of age, race and class, though less often of gender. Of particular note is the Names quilt, which was about raising awareness of AIDS, and the Living Healing quilts, created to tell the story of residential school survivors who were often Indigenous within Canada. The making of quilts is often connected to the home as a site to use the quilts, but also the space in which quilts are made. One of the many roles assigned to women as mothers and wives was that of making clothing and household items. And as a result, the making of a quilt, whether it was for pleasure, made out of necessity, or appropriated as a technique for an artwork, would often be dismissed. They evaporated under the strain of women's daily routine. So back to the MQB. We were a group of women inviting other women into our homes. For those with enough space to accommodate the quilting frame, the home would be rearranged each visit to welcome the quilters. For those not in a position to offer space, they would keep us supplied with fresh bakes, source backing fabric or quilt wadding, etc. We all very much unofficially took on roles within the group to ensure its continuation. Despite my best intentions, it did not, however, start out with such a flattened sense of hierarchy. Even with my exceedingly limited understanding of quilting, particularly as a communal venture, because I had started the group, I did find myself teaching and providing instruction at the start. Not wanting to be recognised as a leader in the group, I quickly developed a modular system for creating blocks, which ensured the individuals are able to choose colour proportions and their own piecing order or process for piecing. This system, and my apparent repetition of the phrase along the lines of "you can do it how you like" or "there are no rules as such," led to the successful completion of 2 quilts, for which we can see plenty of evidence of individuals bringing their own flavour to the quilts. For example, pattern fabric appeared despite being given 2 plain coloured fabrics each. Having decided as a group to stick with a grid format for the quilting, we have a mouse, we've got geometric forms and flowers also involved in the quilting. During those first 2 quilts, there was always a very fine line between everyone demanding clear instruction on design and stitch choices, and then doing whatever they wanted to do anyway. For me, this made me smile the most. Everyone was feeling empowered to make their own choices, despite the desired clarity on direction. At this point, some members of the MQB decided to carry on quilting as a group, and we switched from paying to rent the church hall to work in each other's homes. Over the next few months, we negotiated this new way of working and elected to kind of follow a pattern for the next quilt, using our own scraps of fabrics, recycled clothing, etc. When we quilt as a group, each time we meet, we sit in different spots, and for practical ease, we used a method of passing the needle, for which I might be stitching a line from my right to my left, then the person next to me would take that same needle and thread when it reached them and carry on with the line of stitch. This specific process, along with not keeping the quilts afterwards for personal use, enabled an opportunity to not feel overly precious about decisions and possibilities. Our pride in our work ensured work to the best of our ability, yet there was a freedom embedded in the process. The choice to follow a pattern gave us the space to work out what we were as a group of people, how to communicate on an even footing, paired with the decision to gather in our own homes provided the most significant changes in the group. I observed after a year of working together, our connection moved beyond most other research I found in this field, for which education, development and well-being were the key observations. After a year, our individual voices started to emerge as one communal voice, with a vision and the drive to develop a handwriting of one's own. Fiona Hackney argues that while we continue to think of amateur activities or hobbies as a middle-class pastime, we simply close the doors on recognising the experience and outputs of such activities. Hackney is not wrong. For some members of the MQB, they engage with activities relating to quilting in their own time, trialling other design ideas in practice and on paper, and all seek out opportunities to learn, reading, visiting exhibitions, doing workshops, attending talks, undertaking research online. These quilters are actively looking for cultural opportunities, are contextually savvy, innovative, complex, creative, reflective and skillful. The combination of the self-motivation to learn and pushing one's skills beyond the pattern books as tools to reclaim power within everyday lives clearly demonstrates the importance of looking beyond the overly familiar understanding of the amateur maker as that of just a middle-class pastime. As women, we reclaim the home as a site of domesticity and a space where creativity is silenced as it just becomes a part of domestic duty. The home became our temporary studio, a place to bump hands, build friendships, have autonomy and make connections. Something that seems so much more important now as we move past a year of living with COVID. All of this has emerged from the humble quilt. Thank you very much.